first of the fall meetings of the Ripon Historical Society. And we're going to be learning about some of the barns, not only in our area, but in other areas of Wisconsin as well. Before we get started, we have a few announcements, and I want to make mine first. Bill Willey and his family are in Europe, so I'm not Bill. I'm not. I'm the vice president, acting as a president tonight. We've been, at our board meetings, we've been searching for things to do for the organization, and one of the things we came up with was the idea of maybe we should have some historical field trips. Like, you know, rent a bus or contract for a bus and then go out either whatever day we have to do, maybe in the week or on the weekend, depending when most people would be available for this type of trip. And say a one-day trip out to, to the Wade House and see the new sawmill they have out there, or to other historical spots throughout the state. One day out, you know, and come back that evening and be back by supper time or something of that nature. If we were to have a trip like that, how many would be interested in going? I'd like to have a show of hands so I can see how many people would be. All right, I think I came up with about 16 people on that. And of course we can make allowances for the time will be announced far enough in advance so you can plan for this, and we'll probably open it up, advertise it at the senior center, maybe in the newspaper, so that we can get as many people as we can, because in a way this helps to promote the Historical Society, helps to raise some money for the Historical Society, and as well become an educational function for ourselves. And I'm sure that we'd all enjoy a trip of that nature. Before we begin our program tonight, we have a few announcements, and Mary Brandt, our former president, would like to say a few words.
Well, the first thing is, Bev Chris brought me tonight a mug from Brown's Family Restaurant, which is no more. And I was telling her earlier today or yesterday that I didn't have any what we call in advertising media, visible evidence of a business that's no longer here. So if any of you have such things at home, and the one I'm really looking for right now is something from the Piggly Wiggly. I didn't think to go in and get a shopping bag or something before they closed. So if anybody still has one and hasn't recycled it, or something, for Brown's Family Restaurant, I actually called them the day after they closed and asked if they had a menu they'd give me, and I never got anything. So I may have what you would offer me, but I would appreciate if any of you have something like that you'd be willing to give to our collection. We have quite a collection of former businesses, something from them. It could be a yardstick, it could be a pot holder, it could be a cup, not huge. I didn't do anything huge, because I have a space limitation. And Todd, this is really your function, but you're a newcomer and I'm an old-timer. I see some new faces, and we have a little brochure that was done by some of our board, and it tells you about us, including what membership costs. And I'm just going to leave some on the table in case somebody would like them for the meeting. So to know more about us, it tells a little bit about us, plus what it costs to be a member. And anybody's welcome, whether you're a member or not.
And we also welcome you to become a member. We don't have much of a charge for the membership. It's only $5 a year, and that will cover you for all the publications, newsletters, and everything we send out during the year's time. So we welcome you to join. Being a old-timer, or I guess I'm a new... I belong to the Hawaiian Historical Society, and the whole time I was in Hawaii, I was a Malahini, not a Kama'aina, which were the old-timers. And then I moved to California. And 40 years in California, I was never considered one of the original families. So as president of the Orange County Historical Society, I had to always be introduced as recent resident of the county. But now I come back home to Ripon to find out that I can't make it here either. And I know where years is going to take before I'm accepted as one of the old timers. All right, I'd like to call on Bonnie to introduce our speaker for tonight. and he's going to tell us something about barns. Coming up next week, we're going to have our speaker, an illustrious individual, will be speaking on Lewis and Clark. As you probably recall, Lewis and Clark did not go through Wisconsin, so I was sent here to tell you about what Lewis and Clark did. Connie?
Thank you. We are very lucky tonight to have Frank Farvour as our speaker. I've known Frank for a number of years, both here and through an archaeology organization outside of Oshkosh, and as a member of the Green Lake Writers Group, where I first learned about the grandpa stories. I found that I always learned something new and interesting when I talked to Frank. It is my pleasure to welcome as our speaker, our member, Frank Farvour.
Thank you, Bonnie. Well, what I'll do is duck a ball bat. If you heard or saw the publicity on this event on Channel 7, I must admit I do not have a doctorate in anything. No, but I was referred to as Dr. Farvour. Well, it's a kind of a good feeling, almost like one I had in the Army when I was a captain at the time and received a piece of mail, official mail, addressed to the commanding general. I had to duck that one too. Anyway, the matter of this program is kind of like Topsy just rode. Some time ago, I lamented the fact that the barns of our community were vanishing. And I think back to my boyhood and youth when there were so many, many more of them than there are now. And they are vanishing one after the other. So I simply posed the idea that we maybe ought to get a record of them before they all get away. And that evolved down to here I am. So it's an interesting subject, though. And I think when you get through, you'll see that it is significant to the way of life that we have known in this community. This being pretty much a city at one time of retired farmers. It has a direct agricultural connection, and it's old. And in the old days, the farmers moved to town and they brought some of their lifestyle with them. They all built a barn. Now, perhaps I'm being a bit cavalier with the semantics of all this, using the term barn a little loosely. To me, it's a very generic term. I don't have a dictionary definition of a, quote, barn, but I have invented one. Being a building, first of all, it's 2 stories high. Any one-story building, even if it keeps cows and horses or not, is a shed. But if it's 2 stories high, it becomes a barn, regardless of how big or how small it is. And that is one of the criteria that I have applied in making this collection of pictures and picking out what I have to consider. It all started with this, taking the assignment to be the first program of this term. One evening or one afternoon, Shirley and I just simply cruised the town and made notes of location of barns by street address. And in a couple hours, we had enough for 1 roll of film, and I figured, well, I got a program. Well, the next day, I went out and cruised some more, and lo and behold, I had enough for another roll of film. And then I searched rather diligently. I didn't bring them all in. There's one right next door here that's a little bit too much. I wouldn't have that thing in a picture of outhouses. And also it turns out that I missed a few. But I do have 45 pictures to show you, and I may have missed half a dozen in the city. You have to hunt for them. They turn up when you look and you don't see it, and hey, wait a minute, there is one nestled back there in the weeds. So it was put together in that way, and it's been fun, and Over on the table is a collection of color picture prints made from the same negatives. So if you miss something that you see here, or want to get a longer look at it, go over to the table and page through and have a look, and there they are. And that is part of the permanent record of the society. One of the questions we are asked often is people come to us and say, when was my house built? Sad to say, we can't answer that. We have, however, a source that I've used in the connection of this study on the barns, and that is this publication here. This is known as the Sanborn Fire Insurance Map. It was made by the Sanborn Company out of New York, supported by the fire insurance companies, and those people mapped every city, village, and town in the country. A scale map of 50 feet to the inch, showing every street, well, not every, they took the core of the community, and this one of Ripon does not cover the outlying areas. But they did cover the core of the city, showing the streets, the buildings on the lots, their address, how they're built, the construction, the type of roof, and the occupancy. Now this basic map, this book here was published sometime after 1913 because the former Central Elementary, our high school, was built in 1913 and is shown on here. We, the agents, were loaned these maps, and every couple of years the company would send out corrections in the form of pastovers. And they even supplied the glue, which is a kind of a watered down library paste. But we would paste the corrections over the map, and it continued on looking like it did before. Now, if we look at the map and we find a building shown that hasn't been pasted over, it was there at least in 1914. And every one of the barns that I have studied is shown on the map that are within the area covered by the map were there since at least 1914. Most of these buildings were contemporary with the houses that they appended to them, and most of these houses are over 100 years old. So these barns are actually ancient artifacts of the city. So that's one source, and by the same token, we can at least say, okay, your house is shown on the Sanborn map, it's not pasted over, it was at least 1914 or before. So that is just an interesting aside on the subject. Okay, so none of these barns were built during the 1900s. And one such building was built in 1907 when my grandfather built the Higbee House on the east side of Watson Street. A carriage house was built to append to it. That was in 1907. That building was bought in 1947 by John Eckstein, moved over onto Newbury Street, and it stands as a two-family dwelling right now. It was that fine a building. So, where did the barn fit in local life? Well, my mother grew up at 344 Washington Street. My granddad, Klingbeil, was a teamer. He said he used to describe his life at that time as when I was teaming. He had a team of big draft horses, and he and his horses would go, and they were out for hire. And somebody needed a team to pull a plow or pull a drag or something. Grandpa was available, and he and his team went and did the work. And they had a barn to put them in. They also had cow. And the south side of what is now Lane Street, the western part of it, was then Bismarck Street. And there were houses fronting on Hamburg, and one at the corner of Hamburg and Bismarck, and the rest of the south side of Bismarck was open. And this was the communal pasture. So my mother would take the cow and drive it to the pasture in the morning and retrieve it after school in the afternoon. So this was a way of life. And many people had their cows in the communal pasture. And they all had little barns to keep them in. Just another insight of a way of life that you wouldn't even think of today, but it was commonplace then. So these buildings that I'm going to show you will vary in nature very greatly. The elegant houses had carriage houses. They didn't have barns, at least so they were referred to. And some of these structures were elegant, and I do mean elegant. They served the function to keep the fancy horses and the fancy carriage and the feed for those animals. I think of the building right over here, appending the Reed grout house, the big brick one on the corner. There's a great big frame, almost a three-story barn right behind it. Back when I was in high school, we kids got to hanging around in there. There was a feed bin that was wide, where it was probably 10 feet long, 5 feet wide, and 7 feet deep, with a hopper bottom in it. Before we got there, somebody floored it. They put boards across, so they made a flat floor, and we used to hang out in there. We didn't do anything once we got there, but we probably sat there and complained about things at school and had other great wisdom to exchange. One day, I was at home having supper, and my dad just relating things of the day. He officed right across the hall from Roy Reed, and that house then belonged to his father, Ellie Reed. And he said, a bunch of kids hanging around up there in Reed's barn, and he don't want them in there. He didn't know that I had just come from there. And he never did know that I hung out in there too. It was fun. It was just one of those things. But this feed bin would hold, I bet it would hold 300 bushel of grain. It was just a tremendous piece of equipment. And the barn was sheeted over inside. It was made elegant. And right next door to it, and right up the street from us here, what's now Denny Weir's, the big house then belonged to Horace Bumby. That barn was a true carriage house. And Horace was a benefactor. He was a wonderful, wonderful guy. He fixed one part of the barn as a hangout for us kids. And Arden and I were members of a mortar club, as we called ourselves. That room that was fixed up for us as a club, really, pool table, ping pong table, jukebox, radio, card table. Really, we had all the comforts of home. And we enjoyed that. And but it was just, he didn't really have to do a great deal to it. So put in the furniture and a little oil-burning stove, and there we were. So you'll see some of these pictures of the carriage houses, of the barns, big and small, ragged and smooth. I'll let you just judge for yourself if it's worth looking at. So I have them by location. I'm going to see how much light there is after we get this thing turned down. I may simply, if I can see to read, I'll tell you where they're located. You'll recognize a lot of them, but I'm sure you are going to see scenes where you would never think there was a barn back in there. And this made photographing difficult because you couldn't say, barn, get over there in the good light. Barn, get out from behind that brush. Lots of them are almost hidden in vegetation, but they're there nonetheless. So I think with that, if we can cut the lights down a bit, I'll go into action here, and let's just see what you can do. Okay. Wrong way. Okay, now this starts out with a true ancient artifact. This is the barn behind the the home of the late Betty and Rasmussen. That house is probably 150 years old, and I'm sure this barn is contemporary with it. It was, as you can see, a difficult place to photograph, but we have it for all posterity. I did take two of that one, so here's another view.
Where's that one?
This is on Lincoln Street at
Oh, yeah, really.
626 Liberty, or Lincoln Street, west side of the street. There is Denny Weir's. That behind the brush to the left was the room where the Motor Club held forth. You can see that is a downright beautiful building. This is right back to home. Our barn here at the Historical Society. Actually, the barn is listed by location as appending to the Lawson house. It's the Lawson barn. Interesting tale to connect to that. At one of our open houses, I was on duty in the barn, and one of our visitors came up to me and smiled, and quite an elderly lady. And she said, "This really takes me back." Way back, early, H.N. Aiken, the undertaker, lived in that home and kept his Black Maria in this barn. A horse-drawn hack, a genuine black hearse, and he kept the horses for it there as well. And this lady told of sneaking in through the back door of the barn with other kids and playing around that hearse. Takes all kinds for kids to do. I'll come back to another picture of this structure from the other side later. And there is the barn down at the VFW house. That barn is, again, contemporary with the building that was there, the big home, the John Fenlon home. I believe that building is probably circa 1880 at the latest, and perhaps well before that. Now we go down to Liberty Street. Now there is one that is in its original form. It apparently has been modified to admit an automobile, but it's pretty original. Now, an interesting thing about that, the Ceresco was platted as the village of Ceresco. And it wasn't platted, though, until the Fourierite community was breaking up. And I think they made the land division a matter of record so that they could parcel it out. The blocks were of only 4 lots. Each lot was about an acre square. And alleys, one rod wide, or 16.5 feet, bisected the block from both ways. So the 4 lots were separated from each other by a 1-rod alley, and the barns were back on the back of the lot, so that the cow could be taken out into the alley and taken from there to the communal pasture. And I have picked up, not confirmed, but a fairly good rumor to the effect that this communal pasture operation took place down here in Ceresco, just as it did up on Washington Street. So the cow would be taken out the back door of the barn, down the alley to the pasture, left for the day, and brought back to be milked and put down for the night. There is one in its true form. It has not been converted to use for a garage. It is as was. Boards and battens, black with age, but a genuine historic artifact. The Schultz Honey Farm. Now these were for the honey making operation. Whether they're barns for livestock or not, I don't know. They could have been, but they're there and recorded for posterity. And here's one that nobody would probably realize exists. It actually appends to one of the houses on State Street, and this is taken from that little alley that goes between the college property and the State Street residences. It's a barn. It's 2 stories high. It's got a door up there where hay was probably put into it at one time many years ago. There's a local landmark. It's the one down here behind the paint store that the city is agonizing over. And should it be preserved? Should it be torn down? Well, it don't look like it's good for much. But it is a barn. It's a true barn. And it was used as such, I'm sure. We have a record of it, and there it is. There is a dandy. Audrey, you recognize that? That is behind the Conant home up on Watson Street. That is an utterly magnificent building. Absolutely great. Back right after World War II, I thought I wanted to build myself a house, therefore I better learn how. And I spent several months working as a beginner carpenter for N.A. Bryan, who was Mrs. Conant's father. Mr. Bryan ate his heart out, wanting that barn to move to another location and make a house out of. And it could have been done because it's just an utterly magnificent building. That is a carriage house, not just a barn.
Do we know what the place is like inside, Franklin?
I haven't been inside the barn.
Yes.
I've never been in it, no. No idea. I couldn't guess. I suspect it's magnificent, though. This is a... this is the barn up here at the corner behind the big brick house, formerly one time Reed, one time Jerry Grout. That's the one where the feed bin is where we used to play. You can see that too. That is a carriage house. That's more than a barn. A magnificent structure. Now we're outside the city limits, but just barely. This is on the west side of Union Street. It was formerly the Otto Falk farm. Donnie Dowski owned it when he owned the meat market. It's simply a well-preserved small farm barn. And here's a quaint structure. This too is just outside the city limits. This belongs to the iron worker. Yeah, Paulus. On just outside the city limits on the way to South Woods. It is unchanged. That barn, that building is probably unchanged for the last 150 years, or 125 anyway. But there it is. And then coming down Thomas Street, this too is just barely outside the city limits. Another well-preserved farm barn. This is on the small farm that is recently owned by Fred and Lucille Lehman. I took 2 pictures of that, one from the other angle, to show what it looks like, because that probably isn't going to be there forever. But it's a splendid, magnificent, straight, firm building. This is up on South Grove Street, right next door to where I once lived. Again, a definite barn. It was constructed by, obviously, a man that moved in from the farm. And it is unchanged except for having a door put in to keep an automobile in it. But basically, the interior barn is very much like it was at construction. Over on Matoman Street, no, wait a minute, this is on South Grove Street, tucked in behind one of the houses down near the north end. And there's its neighbor. Now, this has been dolled up, modified, and made modern, but it's a gambrel roof, 2-story building that obviously was a barn at one time and probably housed a cow that was taken to the communal pasture. And there's its neighbor. Pardon? Those two are over on Batoman Street, about half a block down from the hospital and on the east side of the street.
The one was the Licking residence, the superintendent could represent.
I believe you're right. I think that would be where it would be, and I never thought to make that connection, but sure enough. Quite frank, that one is out on East Fond du Lac Street at the corner with Sunrise. And it's just there. It's small, but it qualifies in every way. Bowl 2 coming up. There is the late Aiken barn. That was owned over on Jackson Street, south side of the street, just above the little park. H.N. Aiken owned that place when I was in high school, and I had the misfortune of working for him, primarily taking off the screens and putting on the storms and vice versa. And that is where I was putting on the window, the double storm window in the front, second story. I was just about to set the ladder into its, or set the window into its space, and the ladder broke. And luckily, it didn't break with a bang, it just crumbled, and I rode the wreckage to the ground. I leaned the window up against the house and left the wreckage of the ladder lay and told Mr. Aiken, I'm gone. And then he had whatever it takes to ask me if I could recommend somebody to take my place. Now, that was the third ladder that I had broken, that he'd borrowed for me to use. And I looked at him square in the eye and said, Mr. Aiken, I don't dislike anybody that much. And I bugged out. But anyway, that door, the storms and screens were stored in the upstairs of that barn. And he would station himself up there in that door, and I would pass the windows or screens up to him. And then he would, I hoped, put them in order, but he didn't. Then when the time came to put them back on, they were all messed up, and he couldn't figure out why. But that's a splendid, splendid building. Now, that is over on Jackson Street. Actually, it's a dwelling. All had been looked upon as a dwelling, except the fact that it was the carriage house for the big stone Horner dwelling, which is on Scott Street, right behind it. Or this is behind the dwelling, would call it which way you will. But that was at one time a carriage house. This again is over on Jackson Street, right to the east of the Aiken place. A splendid, splendid building, but obviously, sure, it's been converted to a two-car garage. But it's a barn, in my book, forever. Oh, that one.
It's on Lane Street.
Okay, thank you. That's right. Again, it qualifies. It's been converted, but it's a barn. It was a barn. And this over on Tigert Street, I believe, another one that has been dolled up and converted, but it qualifies, and it's here. That, I've forgotten where that is. Oh, that's up on South Grove Street, just south of Howard. I don't know if it ever was a barn, but it's built like one, and it's 2 stories high. This is on South Grove Street, down near the intersection with Oak. This over on, oh, Azure, I gotta go back. That belongs to my grandson, across the street from me up on Ransom Street. It was a barn many years ago, but there it is. And this one here is on Woodside and right behind it. The building you see behind this one is the one I just showed you.
On that one right back there with the side,
Pardon?
with that little gamble on there, did they haul hay in sideways with that one? Where your son-in-law, what you said there? That,
Well,
now with those doors up, would they have a ring?
well, actually,
Side view?
I don't
My
know.
barn has a-
It's actually, that door is about 4 feet wide. So you could toss a bale of hay through it. And if you're pushing in loose hay, I wouldn't.
I'm thinking of the rail with the big cloth thing that would come down. That probably wouldn't even fit through there.
I'm missing you.
He's talking about a hay fork.
Pardon?
He's talking about a hay fork.
The big hay
The hay
fork,
fork.
like on the barn I have has a little bit of an overhang. And
Oh.
like a railroad track.
Uh-huh.
It had the big thing that you
Yeah.
turned down with the rope that would grab.
There's no evidence of that machinery. There's no track or any supports for a hay fork. So I think this was one you had to load by hand.
Yeah, just throw it through the door. Huh?
Sure. And sweat doing it.
I didn't stop.
There's another one up on, I believe it is Spalding Avenue. Highly converted, but it's still there. This up at the corner of Woodside Avenue and Howard Street. Just a bit of a barn, but it probably would have held the family cow. Now we're back down on Soft Grove Street near Howard, or near Oak. And its neighbor. There's the one that was in the paper. That's up on Batoman Street, belongs to Jack Frank. It's pretty tattered and torn, but it's still there. I don't imagine that's going to be around another 100 years.
Depending on how well it's built.
Right? And a lot of those buildings were built far better than the best buildings today.
I've got one on my property that it's got 1876, 1872 carved in with something with jackknives. I got a cemetery on the property. And the thing is as square as it was the day it was probably built in 1850.
That is just wonderful to know.
I got pictures of it.
That's just great. Wonderful. This, of course, belongs to my colleague Jack Steinbring. And has good data on its history, and I think with him studying here, I've got to recite carefully. But it's, as I have it, the building is probably contemporary with the house, which was built in 1851. It was built by Jacob Woodruff, not as a barn, but as a shop in which to make berry boxes, because Woodruff had many, many berry patches on his property, and he raised and sold berries. So this building was built as a shop to make berry boxes. It was later converted into a barn. A door was cut into it, and it would be the rear on the right side as you see it for animals to pass in and out. Since then, after that became passé, it was converted once again, and it is now a one-car garage. But it has certainly spent its time as a barn. Jack, how'd I do?
Just fine, Frank.
I feel better. Okay, continuing. This is over on Water Street. Insignificant, but it's a two-story building that has been converted to a barn. Beautifully straight and sound. It qualifies. And this up at the corner of Tigert and Hall Street, I believe. At one time belonged to a friend of mine. Anyway, it was a barn. It was a carriage house, really, a small carriage house, and been painted to the Painted Lady effect. And to me, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful structure. Another of those was this again up on either Spalding or Tigert. Well built, formerly a barn, but very, very seriously compromised by reconstruction. And another one in that same neighborhood. This one does not appear on the Sanborn map. It's the only one. Now, the Sanborn map does cover the area where this is located, but that building is not shown. So, even though it looks old, it's not as old as the rest of them. This at the corner of Hall and Tigert, the farmer juicing place, that again is a carriage house. It's a dandy. You drive by, you don't see it. If you drive along the west side of it, it's completely hidden by foliage and vegetation. I had to go in behind the house and use a wide-angle lens and was lucky enough to get this much of a picture of it. But that roof goes way up in the air. It's a monument, really. And another one up in that same neighborhood. Oh no, that's right across the street from the post office. That is the funeral home, or farmer funeral home, Flowers by David. That too was a carriage house in its day. And next door to it, the former Teal residence. Again, it's a two-car garage, but it's 2 stories high. And sure enough, it was a barn once. And I don't recall where in front of that one is. Oh, no. I'll have to let you guess. And the last one's up in my neighborhood, right between Jeff Bumby's house and the one to the south of it. Again, a little narrow beanstalk of a building, but it's 2 stories high, and it's old, ergo, barn. And here we are back home. This is the other view of our barn from the Lawson yard. It's a splendid structure. It's straight and sound, and thank heavens we have it, because we put a lot of stuff in it. So, that is the program. If you have questions, I'll try and answer them, but I sure won't make any rash promises. Franco? Well, we have to presume, I don't think it's contemporary with Lawson House, which was 1855, 54, 5. That's made of gulch, you know.
Those are the original windows?
It could be.
Small ones are older.
Well, this barn, it's a long time since that was new, that is for sure. Well, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it.